I'm Mahan Esfahani. I'm a harpsichord player. When you hear something that you fundamentally are attracted to, nothing can stop you from getting your hands on it. I take exception to when people call the harpsichord a period instrument. We're coming up on 100 years of the harpsichord having a new life. When the harpsichord was revived, new music was written immediately for it. I play the harpsichord because it's the medium by which I feel the most expressive. So I so badly wanted to play the harpsichord from when I was a child. I mean, I played the piano like many people, that we finished, I mean, there was a kit that had already been started, but we finished building a harpsichord kit with my father in the garage, and so I had a kit harpsichord when I was 16. Some people get to borrow the car when they're 16, and I got to finish a harpsichord kit. And actually, I think you'll find that many people who love the harpsichord sort of, I mean, one of my very good friends who's a builder, he became a builder because he didn't have an instrument to play. So, it's not that common, but, when you hear something that you fundamentally are attracted to sort of on a visceral level, nothing can stop you from getting your hands on one. And I sometimes wonder whether I became a harpsichordist partly to prove to myself that I could become a harpsichordist. Maybe that's selling it short a little bit, but I mean, every time I'm with one, I feel very lucky to be with it. I badly wanted for my life to be close to a harpsichord. So we all have weird goals, and that's mine. So the Concert Champêtre, which Poulenc wrote for harpsichord and orchestra, harpsichord and full orchestra, I might add, was actually his first concerto. We commonly call it the harpsichord concerto, but that's not what he called it. The French generally didn't take to concerto genre in the way that basically Germans and Austrians did. So they always, for example, you have the famous Vincent d'Indy Symphony on a Swiss mountain air, which has a prominent piano part. You have the, I think the symphonic variations of César Franck, in which again, there's a prominent piano part. So are these really piano, or are these really keyboard concertos as such? But the Concert Champêtre is his first foray in this genre. He was, I think, 27 or 28 when he wrote it. And he wrote it for and under the supervision of the first great harpsichord sort of concert artist, who was Wanda Landowska in the 1920s. And, you hear this impishness of Poulenc. I mean, he kept that impishness, of course, throughout his life. But I think he had it in spades in his 20s. And describing music with images is something I like to do, but of course it has its limitations. But it's a sort of drive in the countryside, with a sort of early model Ford that goes terribly wrong at one point. And this sort of greatly theatrical quality, obviously that, in France, this scenic quality to music. It's a country where music really goes hand in hand with spectacle, I think a great deal, is very much a part of this work. And actually we have a letter from Poulenc to Landowska where he talks about his memories being stealing cherries from her garden when he was working on this piece, and how much her mentorship meant to him on a personal level. And I think that sort of childlike demeanor writing to this great soloist very much is part of the work. And concurrent to that period, I think actually a few years after the Concert Champêtre was premiered, we know the harpsichordist Ralph Kirkpatrick, who never played the Concert Champêtre because basically he didn't get along with Landowska. But when he was at Landowska's studio, he remarked in a letter home to his family that he had wanted to read some sort of source, something with Landowska, and her response was, yes, we will go over it together line by line. And I think Landowska probably had very much that attitude toward her younger colleague, this sort of, bring it to me, child, and we'll sort of take a look at it. And I think very much her sense for the instrument, her sense for drama, and her uniquely elucidating technique as far as the instrument is concerned is really part and parcel of the Concert Champêtre. I really do love playing this work. I say I get tired of it because I do play it a lot, but no, you don't ever get tired of this work. This humorous, again, impish, sort of provocative side of Poulenc, of course, I think is deeply sincere. We know that he was a deeply sincere friend, a deeply devout person, a person with serious personal torments over his private life. Those who seem to take everything seriously are not necessarily more serious than those who can see a way of making light of everything. Those who make light of everything actually can be very serious people inside. But you know, there are certain things in life, possibly everything in life, to which one can only say, you know, as my mother would say, what can you do but laugh? I recorded the Italian Concerto, oh gosh, probably 2 years ago now. Of course, I would do things very differently now because I feel like that about all my recordings. The recording that always moved me very much of that work was by Landowska, which was, I think, 1931 or 1932, I'm not quite sure. But, you know, Landowska, especially what she does in the second and third movements of the Italian, of course, so the Italian Concerto is Bach's, you know, attempt, if you like, to bring the textures of the orchestra and of an orchestral genre to the keyboard. That is not to say that it is a transcription of orchestra to the harpsichord. Quite the contrary. It is his effort to show that a concerto as a genre can apply to a solo instrument. I think it's a very interesting provocation. And Landowska understands this really wonderfully in her recording, and you know, particularly the way you get a sense that the harpsichord has lungs in the second movement is something, particularly when you think about her harpsichord. It was not what we know of a harpsichord today. It was very much much closer to piano technology. It was a sort of piano builder's reimagination of what a harpsichord was. Some people have called it a plucking piano, which I think is slightly unfair. But she understood this instrument extremely well and made remarkable music with it. And the third movement, to me, she gets the tempo just right. I think most people play it too slow. And so I listened to the Landowska, you know, since I was a kid, and I had that in my mind. And I mean, I don't really listen to my recordings after they're done. You know, that's everybody else's job to critique and to say how much they hate them. But I, you know, did listen to the edits for this before it came out, and I thought, well, that's quite fast, actually. But oh well, I mean, it is what it is. You know, if anything, the swagger and the panache of what Italian music meant to someone like Bach is very apparent in this piece. And, you know, and ultimately, you know, whether it's Poulenc or it's Bach or whatever, you know, my job is to convince you of why I like the piece. I think it's worth sharing with you. So here's why I think it's worth you getting to know the piece. And, you know, inevitably one will come into some degree of, you know, differing opinions or conflict. But, you know, music should not be objective. Great music does not answer questions. It asks questions. So, yeah, I guess I'm still asking myself a lot of questions about this piece. So I've been at the Lammermuir Festival this week. I'm actually here for, gosh, I guess I'm here for like 10 days or something, which is in East Lothian, just east of Edinburgh in Scotland. And this is my second time here. Lammermuir is a really remarkable festival, just with the range of music, the range of musicians, the range of perspectives on music that you can hear at Lammermuir. And this is I've just completed the third of my 5 concerts for this residency that I have here. I've played a program of new and modern music for harpsichord. So I played 2 works with electronics, with live electronics. One of them being a work that was written for me by Oskar Jokl, who's actually assistant to Petrenko at Berlin right now, great conductor and wonderful composer. And the other one is a sort of classic of the genre, which is Luc Ferrari's Programme Commun from 1972. And I also played some Andriessen and some Takemitsu and Ligeti, which is, early music at this point. And this relates, I think, nicely to the fact that I'm coming to play the Poulenc Concert Champêtre in Belfast because, well, the Poulenc Concerto is one of the first really great sort of substantial modern works for the harp. When I say modern work for the harpsichord, the harpsichord sort of goes to sleep in the 19th century, and it's revived at the beginning of the 20th century. And Francis Poulenc and Manuel de Falla, in roughly the same year or two, both wrote concertos, both for Wanda Landowska. And this is where, I mean, now it's 2023, right? So we're coming up 100 years of this, of the harpsichord having a new life. And I think this is, and what I think I'd like people to take from this is that when the harpsichord was revived, new music was written immediately for it. Okay, so it wasn't, yes, it was revived to play earlier music. No, it would be churlish to deny that. In Germany, it was revived to play in the great passions and the cantatas of Bach. In England, of course, it was used for, Messiah, works like that. Also the revival of early English music, all of the great solo music, and likewise in France. But from the beginning, it was seen as a vehicle for new music. So, if anything, the idea that we take so-called period instruments, and I don't think that the harpsichord is a period instrument, but the idea that we would take so-called period instruments and play only old music on them is a postmodern idea. It has nothing to do with the revival of this instrument. And actually, I take exception to when people call the harpsichord a period instrument. I mean, as I saw today in my experience with the modern music that I was playing, I mean, in the case of one of them, we had to reconstruct a piece, the traditions for which had been lost because the composer had died, and that's Luc Ferrari's piece. And so that was a project in performance practice, and if you like, in the revival of earlier repertoire. And obviously certain questions of performance practice go into that. I was not playing it on the kind of harpsichord that it would have been appropriate for, so actually, then there's this kind of disconnect between instrument and repertoire, and, great figures in that movement, and for me the greatest figure would be someone like Nicholas Harnoncourt. The point of his work was to ask us to always evaluate the music critically and to consider the technical, historical, organological context of this music, and but that the music continues to live, and that goes back to the Bach revival, the work of Mendelssohn, and the expectation that every generation has to examine this music and has to ask new questions, and whether that's Poulenc, whether that's Luc Ferrari, whether that's Bach, whether whatever that is, that Mendelssohn's sort of challenge to us is still very much a living challenge. We are very responsible to this music.